This is the Mini iCube, a 3D printed Rubik's Cube mod. But before I explain exactly what it is, let's think about the past. You may remember that several years ago, I made a video about a puzzle I printed off of Thingiverse called the Fisher iCube. Actually, you probably don't remember it, because I think that's like my least viewed video of all time. Anyway, the puzzle's design was terrible and it barely worked. However, before the Fisher iCube completely fell apart, I got to see that its solve was actually quite interesting, and I always wanted to revisit the idea with a new puzzle that, actually works. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the iCube, the original was made by Quincas in 2005, and it's just a 3x3 with 2 layers glued together. I set out to make one as an extension of a 30mm 3x3, with the side goal of making it look as close to a real 3x3x2 as possible. During the process, I ran into some interesting and fairly unexpected challenges that I had to overcome, so let's take a look at the design. It mostly looks like a straightforward 3x3 extension mod, with the obvious difference of the bottom 2 layers being bandaged together. However, if you look at the parts head-on, you'll notice that the edge is significantly narrower than the corner. And I can't easily just expand the edges to match the corners, for reasons I'll explain later. So instead, what I did is visually minimize the corners and maximize the edges. Normally the fillets on faces are 1.5mm each, adding up to 3 as you can see on this horizontal slice. However, for the vertical slices I did 2.5 and 0.5 fillets, still adding up to 3, but making the edges look larger. Additionally, I also added large fillets to the external edges to once again make the corners look smaller. The end result of all these fillets is that the Mini iCube looks a lot more proportional than it otherwise would have. Now, the reason for all this trickery is that the extension mods come straight from the inner 3x3's cuts. Obviously, the inner 3x3 has corners and edges of equal size, and if you add material via the extensions, it's mainly going to the corners. In most of my 3x3 extension mods, this isn't a concern because I modify the external cuts as I need to. However, you can't do that right outside the cube, you need a small buffer zone. Imagine for a minute that the 2x2 section of the fused illusion is an extension of the 3x3 type parts. You can see that the cut doesn't rise to the 2x2 level immediately. It actually stays flat for a bit outside the 3x3. That's because in mid-turn, the 3x3 occupies a larger radius, and if you were to change the cuts right outside the 3x3, that would interfere with the turn. I did experiment with this when trying to design the iCube, but my options boiled down to making a huge cube or having a normal size cube with curvy cuts on the white side and straight cuts on the yellow side, which I thought was gross. So I decided this Mini iCube was the closest to what I actually wanted to achieve. Now let's take a look at the Mini iCube's build process. So here's what I've got for the iCube. Now the thing is, this isn't actually all of the parts. I'm currently reprinting some of the parts for this cube, but I felt like because I'm only missing 3 parts in total, this is going to be just enough to get the cube built right now. I've also divided them vaguely into what layer they should be on, since the end result is to have something that looks like a 2-layered puzzle. So these 2 layers will be connected together, and then this layer will be separate. And yeah, so I'm probably going to glue on these single layer parts first to kind of provide support for the double layer parts when I glue them on later. Something I want to address about these double layer parts is if you look at this is a very thin wall, and you might think that this isn't going to provide much structural support. But the thing is, if this was alone, you'd be right, but this is going to be glued onto a cube, so essentially there's not going to be any force put onto this alone. It'll just be an extension of the piece underneath it. So that's why with extensions, if your thin part is directly on top of the cube, you can have thinner extensions than you'd have with just a regular, fully original mechanism. So yeah, let's get to gluing. Alright, so I have the first layer done. You will notice that one of these corners is missing, and that's because that's one of the parts that's currently being reprinted. So now we get to the interesting part, in which we have to glue on kind of the parts that cover two layers at once. I have actually designed something similar to this in the past, but it never ended up in a puzzle that I've shown on the channel, so I guess for you this is the first time you're seeing me actually covering multiple layers with a single extension. And it genuinely is an interesting concept, because I mean, not everything has to be just a straightforward 3x3 extension mod. You can modify and only use the parts of the 3x3 that you need to, you know? So I think I'll get to gluing other layer parts now. Alright, and I think that's the extent of what I can glue on at the moment. I am missing two of these corners and one of these corners, and I do have this edge, and I guess I could try gluing on this center, so that'll be the last thing I do for now. But yeah, so what I'm basically going to do is glue the center in, and then wait for all my other parts to finish printing. And then I'll finish assembling the cube and sand down all of these faces so that the stickers adhere better. And then I'll sticker the cube and take it outside, and we'll see how it is. I think I was pretty successful at making the mini iCube look how I wanted it to. Honestly, you can't even really tell that the edge stickers are narrower than the corner stickers unless you really pay attention to it. In fact, while stickering, I actually confused them a bit before remembering that they were different. The double layer faces are obviously still non-proportional, but that isn't something I can change easily, and I think it looks decent enough. Of course, the base 30mm 3x3 turns very well, making the mini iCube turn very smoothly and even corner cut a bit. With larger extension mods, sometimes the puzzles tend to catch a bit, but these parts are barely extended, so the extensions don't significantly interfere with turns. If you want to make one of these mini iCubes for yourself, the files are available on Thingiverse at the link in the description. All the parts are very easy to print with no support material required anywhere. The puzzle is fairly small too, so the parts don't require much print time. I've also provided the specific sticker template I used, so you can get your mini iCube to look just like this one. I have solved the mini iCube several times at this point, and honestly, for the very little amount of effort that it took to make this cube, it's been a really fun experience figuring out how to solve it. Solving the first layer and the last layer are two completely different experiences, which I also find to be very interesting. If you end up making a mini iCube for yourself, try solving it and then feel free to post a comment letting me know what you thought of it. I personally think this is a really nice little cube. Finally, on Thingiverse, there's actually a decently turning iCube. You no longer have to deal with that mess of a Fisher iCube or iFloppy Fisher Cube or whatever the original creator called it. In general, I think a lot of the puzzles in the iCube series just have ridiculous names. But anyway, let's see just how interesting the mini iCube is to solve by first scrambling it. So the first step in solving this miniature iCube is going to just be getting this back into its regular shape. Now keep in mind that the white pieces and the yellow pieces are actually different. This is two parts bandaged together, whereas this is a single part. And what that means is that each white edge is actually a center bandaged to an edge. So that means these can't really move around the puzzle that much. So that's just something to keep in mind. Other than that, I presume that this step is just intuitive, as all you're really doing is just moving parts around and trying to make them match up better. So let's take a look. Alright, I did spend too long trying to get the final corner into position, but at the very least, the first layer is solved into correct shape. Now remember that this, and this are all visually edges, but they all contain a center part, so they cannot actually be cycled around in any way. So all we can do is cycle around these corners that are actually a mixture of one corner and one edge. And the last layer, I'm not worried about it in any way right now. It's just going to be something that I solve after I finish this first layer, because this first layer is by far the more difficult one. Alright, and now the first layer corners are positioned correctly. Once I actually got this central layer to be the correct shape, it wasn't that bad. All I really had to do was put one of the corners onto this layer and then move it around until it was in the correct position and then put it back up to the top layer. And just so you know, what I did just now is by far the most interesting and most difficult part of this solve. Just just having to grapple with these two connected layers together. And also get over the mental roadblock of the white parts looking exactly the same as the yellow parts, even though they're completely different internally. So now let's get to the yellow layer. Let's quickly orient these two edges. And here we are. So the thing about the yellow layer, which is the single layer, is you're actually at a pretty good advantage if you know how to speed solve a Rubik's Cube. Because not enough of the beginner method algorithms actually work on the top layer to allow you to solve the entire cube with it. But there's definitely a good chunk of OLLs and PLLs that do work on this. So because I know none of those that aren't already in the beginner's method, I have a page of OLLs and PLLs that I'll be using to try and get this solved. Yeah, that was easy. A single algorithm and the whole top layer is oriented. I will say that although I'm still not into speed solving, knowing the algorithms does have its perks, especially with these weird bandaged cubes. Okay, now that the top layer is oriented, let's worry about the PLLs. Now, what I've ran into is the PLL for this actual situation doesn't work because you do an X and then an R2 and then an F, and you'll see that this is bandaged, so I can't actually proceed with the PLL. That basically shows the fact that if you make basically any kind of double turn on these layers, you're not going to be able to make this cross turn. The OLLs and PLLs that are more likely to work are the ones that only have single turns that they use, rather than double turns. So essentially what you do is you perform just various algorithms onto the top layer until you find a OLL or PLL that actually works for your specific situation. And here we are, the mini iCube is solved. Honestly, for the amount of effort that it took to make this, which was very little, this is an amazing puzzle. Like, even if you're capable of solving a 3x3, even speed solving it, this is still quite a challenge, and I had a ton of fun. As I said earlier, the files for this will be on Thingiverse. Again, the base puzzle for this is a Moyu 30mm 3x3. Very good puzzle, and this is barely an extension mod, so this turns well just like the base puzzle. Just overall, very fun and rewarding mod to make. And a nice change of pace from the more intense and more complex puzzles I've been making recently. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching and have a great day.